I never get to do that. Love it. Made 16 movies. I think I've done that once. Clerks.
This guy's going through all the eggs, look. This has been going on for 20 minutes now.
What's he looking for?
Said he has to find the perfect dozen.
Perfect dozen?
Yeah, each egg has to be perfect.
Whenever I talk about Clerks, it's almost as a very divorced experience because the guy who made Clerks is completely different than the guy who stands here talking about the making of Clerks, right? Clerks was made by a very brave, like 22, 23-year-old kid from Jersey who had no right to believe in himself, but for some reason, after a lifetime of watching movies, saw one, Richard Linklater's Slacker, that made him think, I bet I can do this. It was about seeing himself and his friends and his world on the big screen. And his friends and his world were dudes that sat around talking to each other about comic books and movies.
Empire had the better ending. I mean, Luke gets his hand cut off, finds out Vader's his father, hand gets frozen, taken away by Boba Fett. It ends on such a down note. I mean, that's what life is, a series of down endings.
The kid who started the journey and the guy who's constantly commenting on that movie and whatnot, two different people. Because that kid made a movie where at the end, Dante, the main character, gets killed when the store gets robbed. And John Pearson, who is the producer's rep on the movie, he was like, I'll rep this movie, but you have to cut that ending. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? He goes, you made this really great movie where you fall in love with these guys for 90 minutes and then you kill one of them because what seems like you have no better reason to do it than you don't know how to end this movie. And I was like, no, it's the biggest joke in the movie. He's not even supposed to be there that day and he dies, but I'm bummed. And he's like, that's not even funny. He goes, cut it. And this movie has a future. So the kid who made the movie never would have cut that ending. He would have died on the cross of art, man. Are you kidding me? That's when I woke up. You know, that's when I came online and was like, oh, wait a second. If we cut that ending, this movie has a future and we might be able to do this again. This ain't about art, kid. This is about business. You only get to make your art if we do business. I always felt bad about that because I know the kid who started the journey and he's my fucking hero. That's why by the time we get to Clerks 3, I killed Dante. And Brian O'Halloran was like, guy who plays Dante. I was like, what'd you think? And he goes, well, he's going, I'm kind of heartbroken, man. Like, you know, I never get to play Dante again. I was like, why not? Why couldn't Randall talk to a dead Dante all through Clerks 4? He's like, you mean I could be a Force ghost? I was like, bang, dude. So if I run out of money, count on being a Force ghost. That's how we'll get to Clerks 4.
I'm talking about this thing you have, this inability to improve your station in life.
Fuck you.
It's true, man. You sit there and blame life for dealing you a cruddy hand, never once accepting the responsibility for the way your situation is.
It's happy accidents in black and white. We were shooting under fluorescent lights. You shoot under fluorescence with 16 millimeter color film on an Arri SR2, and you're going to come up with green pallor unless you get a really great lighting package, which we couldn't afford. So at the end of the day, I was like, well, I asked Dave Klein, who now shoots like The Mandalorian and stuff like that. I was like, baby Dave, because he was the youngest in our crew, he's like 18 years old. Is there some way to shoot the movie where we don't have to rent like a lighting package? That's going to be like another $500. And he goes, yeah, you could shoot under the fluorescence, but you'd have to shoot in black and white. And I was like, black and white? They wouldn't have the green pallor? He goes, in black and white, there'd be no green. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And then when the movie started playing at film festivals and people started writing about it seriously, people would write things like, what's brilliant about the movie is it's shot from the perspective of the black and white store security camera. First time I read that, I was like, what a reach. But the next interview I did, they were like, black and white's a choice. And I was like, wow, I felt like we would try to emulate the store security camera. The Jay and Silent Bob Saga. When we were working on Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, you got to remember, I was coming off of Clerks, then Mallrats, then Chasing Amy, and then Dogma. So we had back-to-back like pop cultural hits. Dogma had an all-star cast. And so there was a lot of like agents with other famous clients calling in to Christine Sheeks, who was our casting director on Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Like I met with Matthew McConaughey. Go figure. And I think it was Christine Sheeks who was just like, well, who's somebody you always loved as a kid? And I was like, well, like Mark Hamill. And she goes, oh my God, we can reach out to Mark Hamill. So I was like, I literally had a crush on Carrie Fisher. And so she was like, oh my God, let's reach out to Kari. And so we'd reached out to them separately. They both said yes, ironically, on the same day, but neither of them knew that they were involved. If they had, I don't think they would have said yes. Like in talking to Mark afterwards, Mark's like, look, I said no to everything Star Wars, except for two things, The Simpsons and this. And both times is because my kids told me I would be stupid if I didn't do this.
What the fuck?
Mark didn't come because he was like, I love Clerks. He was like, I've heard of it. You know what I'm saying? And when Kari came, she said, what you were going to pay me is the value of these 2 antique beaver chairs that I've had my eye on for the last month. So you guys buy me those beaver chairs and I'll be in the movie. And so we did. We bought her the beaver chairs. I think they were like $3,000 or something like that.
But it's a lot easier to say that you live by the book than to actually do it.
So she shows up on the day we shoot. She's like, hi, I'm Kari. And I was like, I'm a massive fan, man, like growing up naturally and blah, blah, blah. She's like, thank you. She'd heard it all before. And I was like, but I got to tell you, like, I'll never forget. You're the only person I've ever worked with who was like, pay me in antique beaver chairs. I was like, what's that all about? And she was like, the beaver chairs? I thought that'd be appropriate for this movie. And I was like, there's a screenwriter. There's a writer, I says.
Hey, if it'll get me a couple 100 miles across the country, I'll take a shot in the mouth.
Yeah, but we ain't gay.
Don't be so suburban.
He was so serious about the craft, always serious about acting. Like he's method, true method. And so on Jane Silent Bob Strike Back, he comes over, he's like, Kevin, I have a question for you as the author of this piece. I was like, okay. And he was like, in the scene, my character, and he's playing a hitchhiker who Jane Silent Bob stumble across. I'm talking to these 2 idiots about, you know, the unwritten book of the road. I said, oh, yeah. And he goes, okay, now, does my character believe in the unwritten book of the road, or am I just fucking with these 2 assholes? And I was like, George, I gotta be honest with you, you've already put more thought into the script than I ever have. And he goes, well, what is it? And I was like, if I had to pick while I was writing it, probably lean toward, you know, this guy believes. He goes, that's what I thought. That's the intent I'm going to play. And I was like, you're very sweet, but you could literally phone this in. You're just the guy who blows the trucker in the scene. And he's going, you think that, right? He goes, you don't know anything about performance, Kevin. Would you like me to explain performance to you? I was like, please. And he goes, performance is the subtle art of suspending the window of disbelief. The audience has to believe everything I'm saying, and everything I'm saying has to come from an honest place. Truth is at the heart of the performance. So there's no way I could deliver for you what I need to deliver unless I know the truth of the story. So when I ask you that question, it's not to be a smartass. It's so that I can understand how deep I'm going to throat this dick. And I was just like, let me see what you got. And he goes, oh, and you see it in the movie. He's like, excuse me. When you're a filmmaker, you're supposed to be pushing for an Oscar eventually, right? Don't they all dream about winning Best Director? Like, I've been told that I'm not a director so many times that, like, why would I ever think I'd win Best Director? So that was never part of my journey. You know what I'm saying? It's closer to Homer Simpson, like when, like, he's like, oh, that guy's my exact twin. Oh, that dog has a puffy tail. Like, I just go in whatever direction Whimsy takes me, I guess. Dogma.
If we cut off our wings and transubstantiate to complete human form, we become mortal. If we die with clean souls, there's no way they can keep us out. We won't be angels anymore, but at least we get to go home. Who sent the paper? Who cares who sent the paper? All that matters is that after all these years, we found a loophole. He can't keep us out anymore.
The Catholic Church, which has a real problem with recruitment lately, could have used Dogma as a recruitment film. You know what I'm saying? That movie is reverent. 2 organizations that went after the movie without having seen it, Frame Unseen. The Catholic League, and then the other organization was the Association for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. They were the ones that made the most noise, and they hadn't seen the flick. And I think if they had, like, yeah, they would have had to get past some, like, butt-fucking jokes. I always felt that, like, you know, in a very Catholic tradition, suffering before reward, right? So in that spirit, get through the butt-fucking jokes, and you'll see, like, this is a movie that is insanely not just pro-faith, but waves the flag for your dopey organization, even though it shouldn't. I've met members of the clergy since then who are like, I use it all the time with my parishioners, and it's great for youth culture and what. But that movie would still work. That cast is still viable across the boards. Like Ben and Matt, still a thing. Salma Hayek, still a thing. Chris Rock, slapping. Jay and Silent Bob, believe it or not, still a thing. We're about to make another Jay and Silent Bob movie. Can you believe that shit? Talk about failing upwards. But they've been around since Dogma as well. So it could still be used as instructional for youth. It's not a dry way in to the faith. It's lubed.
I am the Metatron.
Alan Rickman was not foretold in the stars.
Don't tell me the name doesn't ring a bell. You people. If there isn't a movie about it, it's not worth knowing, is it?
Now, when I watched Die Hard for the first time, I fell in love with Alan Rickman. I came into that theater to see Bruce Willis. I was a big Moonlighting fan. But I left going, who's the other guy? So we come around to cast in the movie, and John Gordon, who's our exec at Miramax, calls me up one day and he goes, bro, Alan Rickman just came in. And I was like, get out of here, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. Hans Gruber, are you serious? And he's like, he was here, bro. All he talked about was, what is the guy who made Chasing Amy doing next? And I was like, that's me. And he's like, yes. So Alan joined us and we became friends. Like that was something I never understood until late in his life. Honestly, until he passed away. I always thought he was just being polite because we'd made Dogma together and stuff. But he was genuinely interested in me and my family. And when I say my family, I also include Jason Mewes. One of my favorite moments being on the set of Dogma at that church in Pittsburgh. And I looked over on the step of the church and there's Alan Rickman sitting next to Jason Mewes and they are engaged in the most intense conversation. And I remember thinking, what the fuck could these two possibly have to say to each other? But Rickman was like genuinely interested in Jason, was always just like, he's a true American icon. So Rickman and I remained friends up until he passed away and stuff. Anytime I was in England, he would be like, I'm coming to your show. So he went to the show that I did in London at the O2. And I said, so what you been up to? He goes, I bought an apartment. I finally broke down and bought an apartment in New York. But there's problems. I said, what? And he goes, I bought it in the same building as my friend. I was like, why is that a problem? He goes, my friend is Ray Fiennes. And I was like, and he goes, if the Harry Potter fans find out that Snape and Voldemort live in the same building, they'll bring it down. Don't you understand? It's adorable. Mallrats. People will come up to you and tell you like the weirdest things about the shit you've made. I was at a Comic-Con not too long ago, Dallas Fan Expo. Guy comes up to me and he has a copy of Mallrats, VHS, like well-worn and stuff. I was like, look at this piece of Americana. Holy crap, man. And he goes, that's the movie that saved my life. He's going, every day of my life when I was a kid, my father beat me to near death. I would come home from school and he would beat the shit out of me, really hardcore. And then I would crawl to my bedroom, a bloody mess, and I would close the door and I'd put Mallrats in. And I would escape to the mall. And Brody and TS and Jay and Silent Bob, they were my salvation. He's like, I had to live 12 years that way. He's like, and I survived because of this tape. Now I'm a father and I got a kid and I would never do to my kid what that piece of shit did to me. But I want to give him this tape to show him that his old man survived and he can survive anything. It was Mallrats. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't even like Dogma or one where I was really trying or something like that. Like I didn't put any thought into that movie going, one day this is going to save somebody's life.
I had a girl probably the same as yours. She always complained that I spent too much time with my own comics, and eventually we broke up.
See, what did she know? Here you are now, a legend in the field. Probably had a slew of women since her, am I right?
Mallrats features Stan Lee's first cameo, but I would argue it's not a cameo. Stan Lee's one of the cast. He's got like multiple scenes in the movie. He's got multiple scenes in the movie because of him. He wasn't even supposed to be in the movie. Stan Lee was not a character in the first draft or two of Mallrats. Jim Jacks, who is our producer, read the scene that took place with Brody where Brody meets the guy who gives him advice. He's like, who's this comic book guru supposed to be? And I was like, oh, like it'd be like a Stan Lee or something like that. And he goes, well, why don't you just make it Stan Lee? And I was like, well, I don't know Stan Lee. And Jim Jacks goes, well, I do. And that's when I realized Hollywood is good. Like all these fuckers know each other. So he goes, why don't you rewrite the scene for Stan? I'll bring it to him and see what he says. And I'm like, all right. So I rewrote it for Stan. So called it at noon. And it was like Stan Lee calling. I was like, and he said, hey, this is Stan Lee. And I was like, oh my God, I know who you are. I said, this is crazy, man. Like I grew up listening to you. I'm a huge fan, big lover of the work, obviously. He goes, I could tell. I read the pages. I'm very flattered. And I was like, well, can you do it? Do you want to do it? Come play with us? And he goes, well, here's the thing, Kevin. He's going, you have me in this movie talking about the girl that got away in a very lovely monologue. He goes, if I'm in a movie as me, talking about the girl that got away. The girl I got at home will lock the door and not let me back in the house. What I'm suggesting is we put in one more scene where I talk about how I was just kidding. That way Joni won't be mad. And I thought that was incredibly sweet. So I wrote another scene where Stan meets up with T.S., Jeremy London's character.
Hey, I think he bought it.
Yeah? What kind of story did you give him?
Oh, it was the vulture soliloquy, from the Spider-Man anniversary issue. Love, be a vulture tonight. Yeah,
well, I can't thank you enough, Mr.
Oh, forget it.
I'd known him for a long time, and what I found out was Stan was nothing if not brilliant at expanding the brand of Stan. So Stan figured out how to get one more scene in the movie. Stan didn't really care about what Joni would have thought. It was a movie. He didn't give a shit. It was a guy that made up Thor, for God's sakes. But he was like, this would be a good way to expand my role in the movie. So he was clever. Clever as hell, old Stanley. Zack and Miri make a porno.
He said he makes $100,000 a year because he shoots and distributes his own porno flicks.
If it's so easy, how come everybody doesn't do it?
Because other people have options and dignity.
Zack and Miri make a porno is basically me just telling the story of how we made Clerks. At a certain point in my career, if you look at my early stuff, it's informed by the life that I had lived. Since I was always trying to reflect my real life had become about making movies. And so Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is a movie about making movies. The snake starts eating its own tail. If you ever watch Zack and Miri make a porno and Clerks 3 back to back, very similar in structure because they're both about the making of Clerks. But what Zack and Miri make a porno wound up being was the blueprint for OnlyFans. By the end of the movie, they come up with OnlyFans, and I didn't make a fucking dime off that shit.
I mean, you look beautiful. You always look so beautiful, so I guess it's not a big deal, but you look amazing.
I think everything I've ever done has a degree of sweetness and a degree of salaciousness to it. There's so many anal jokes in that movie. There's a big shit joke. The MPA was like, this is clearly NC-17 territory. And NC-17 was a tough rating to have hanging over your head back in the day. My point to them was because you're allowed to cite other movies. And I was like, there was a movie that just came out called Jackass. And in that movie, there's a sequence called The Fart Helmet. That movie was R-rated, and that shit was real. So, why on earth could that be an R and we're not? And, just like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I filibustered until they gave me the R. Tusk!
I don't know where he is, but I'm somewhere. I'm in his weird fucking house. I'm like 2 hours from Winnipeg. I'm so fucking scared.
So me and Scott Mosier, who produced all my movies, we were doing a podcast since 2007. I know the whole world does podcasts now, but we were on episode 258 of Smodcast, and the episode's called The Walrus and the Carpenter, where I hit Scott with this ad that I found online. It was like a kind of meme article that had traveled around. This website called Gumtree.uk, which was kind of like the best I could figure, Craigslisty kind of affair over in England. There was a listing for a guy who was like, I have a room for rent in my mansion, and you can live in it absolutely rent-free with complete run of the house and the estate. In exchange for 2 hours a day, I have constructed a very realistic walrus costume that I would like you to wear. And then he told this really poignant story about why this was presented as real. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me, man. This is, who would answer this? They had 2,500 respondents. People you know what? I'll dress like a walrus for a free room in a mansion and stuff. And I was like, you're going to show up. This dude's going to knock you out, sew you into that suit, make you the human walrus and stuff like that. And then as we slowly built the story on the episode of the podcast, unintentionally, just trying to crack each other up, we eventually got to a point where I was so enamored of the idea where you hear me talk about it. That's the beautiful thing about the podcast that birthed Tusk is, generally, when you see an artist's art, you see the end product. Very rarely is the audience present for the moment of inspiration, the birth where I talk myself into it because at one point I'm like, we're all the brave filmmakers, who would make this man to walrus transition movie. Like, show me one. And then I remembered I used to be a brave filmmaker. And so I was like, you know what, man? And you hear me say it on the podcast, I'm like, copyright Kevin Scott, man. I'm doing this. I was like, if you like this idea, go to Twitter and hashtag walrus yes. If you think it's stupid and a waste of my time, hashtag walrus no. And the next day there was just a sea of walrus yes. So much walrus yes, one walrus no. And the one walrus no said, I'm really walrus yes, but I'm voting walrus no to support the democratic process. So because the internet told me it was a good idea, I wrote Tusk. And the internet, never wrong, never misses. That movie dialed my clock back 20 years with a particular audience. An audience I was never gonna hit. Tusk is the movie that winds up reintroducing me to a bunch of kids who are art school kids, college kids, like for whom Tusk is a thing. I was crestfallen when Tusk didn't work theatrically, believe it or not. It's an A24 movie, probably one of the only A24 movies that took a shit at the box office. So at the end of the day, even though I'd been through it with Mallrats and Jersey Girl, where it's like, oh, all is lost. And then years later, people embrace them and love those movies and stuff and forget about the box office. And still, on Tusk, it was like, oh my God, what have I done? Why did I make Tusk? What a mistake. And then a couple of years later, it was like, oh, that's why I made Tusk. You're never making the movie for someone today. You're making it for somebody way down the road.
I'm Guy Lapointe. That is my name, Guy Lapointe, and I spent 20 years as the inspector of the Sûreté du Québec.
I'd written the role of Guy Lapointe to be played by Quentin Tarantino, because I know Quentin likes to act, and I know that he was a fan of Red State. I made Red State with him and Michael Parks, who was also going to be in Tusk. And he's the massive Michael Parks fan. I found Michael Parks by way of Quentin Tarantino. So I was like, oh my God, he'll love to be in a movie with Parks, where he's this guy with a ridiculous French accent, French-Canadian accent, hunting this killer of men who turns people into walruses. Sent it to him, never heard back. So we called and the word was no, flat out no. What we found out later on was he thought we were offering him the role of the walrus, and he was offended by that. And I'm like, well, no, that's Justin Long, who wasn't offended by it. But Justin Long's mom was like, don't take this role and never call that boy back, in regards to me and stuff. Quentin didn't want to do Tusk. We were without a Guy Lapointe. We were Guy-less. And I had my kid went to school with Lily Rose Depp. I had dropped the kid off at their place at one point because they were going to Coachella. And he was like, here's my number, Johnny. Was like, here's my number. I'm going to take the girls to Coachella. Text me, if there's any issues, you got any questions. I said, I could ask you a question right now. He's like, go ahead. And I was like, can I go to Coachella with you? And he was like, and they left. I was like, who would be good in this role, man? And I was like, Depp would kill this. And he's like, you know what? I'll text him. And so I text him. I was like, hey, man, it's Harley's dad, because that's who I am in that world. I was like, I know you get this all the time, but I got a movie that I think you'd be perfect for and stuff. And I sent a link to a blog I had written about it, so there's a description. And I was like, what do you think? And shortly after I sent it, the three bubbles came up. He's, he kind of, his texts are like him, just scarves all over it. And he wrote back how delicious. This seems like something I would love to swim around in. Color me intrigued. So he came in and shot with us. We'd done the whole movie except for the Guy Lapointe stuff. And then we did 2 days with him. But, the only thing he was like, just don't credit me. So in the credits, we didn't market it. And I remember Scott Mosier, he's like, in a movie that has a Justin Long dressed up in a fucking human walrus chimera suit, the weirdest thing about this movie is that Johnny Depp is also in it. Jersey Girl.
What are your intentions with my father? Do you plan on marrying him?
I don't...
Because I was taught that only married girls show their girl parts to boys. Right, Daddy?
Right. Yes.
I can recite for you a litany of Jersey Girl reviews, really shitty Jersey Girl reviews. Or I could tell you stories about people who are like, that's the movie that me and my mom watched while she was dying of cancer. She loved George Carlin. She went to school with him when she was a kid. Like things like that. Over 30 years, that's what gravitates to the top. You got to remember, part of my whole shtick, like I started making movies, but standing on stage and making jokes and telling stories and Q&As, comedy, became a side hustle for me. And that had everything to do with George Carlin. And I couldn't thank him for everything he had given me, but I could give him the one thing he wanted, which was to be in movies. Everything about George was great. He came to the Jersey Girl set so like fucking method. It was nuts. We were doing this rehearsal. It was just me and him and Affleck. Ben is opening his script, fucking pouring coffee and shit. And George is like just dialed in. He goes, Kevin, I have a question for you as the author of this piece. I said, recognize. Okay, my character is always giving Greenie shit. That's the character Stephen Root played.
Who are you, the Holy Father? Everybody knows I meant St. Peter. You don't have to explain my shit.
He goes, I'm always stepping on Greenie's dick, and there's no obvious reason for it. Greenie doesn't deserve the treatment that I give him, and it's been kind of bugging me. But I realize it's my problem and not yours. What I did last night was I wrote a backstory for my character. Why he hates Greenie so much. Like, it goes back to a hand job in high school. Don't worry about it. It don't matter. But I wrote 6 pages of this backstory, and I've memorized it. Now I'm going to throw it out. I won't reference it in any of the dialogue whatsoever. But just know that when I get in Greenie's face, that's what I'm going to be pulling from as my motivation. And instantly turned to Ben and I was like, why can't you be this fucking good, man? I remember one of my favorite moments, like on a set. We weren't even shooting yet. We were on Dogma and we were in rehearsal stage. And at one point, you know, I'm standing next to George. I was like, what are you working on now? And he goes, I just finished up my opening piece for my next HBO special. And I was like, can you do it? And he goes, you want me to do it right now? And everybody in the room, he's like Chris Rock, Linda Fiorentino, Salma Hayek, me, Jason Lee, Jason Mewes, Ben, Matt, the whole shebang, all of us in the room. We were like, yeah, do it, do it. We all sat down and he did this 10-minute piece just off the top of his head, perfectly. Same way I'd see him do it in the actual special when it aired a couple months later and stuff. And all these people at the height of their game, these 2 motherfuckers just won an Oscar for Good Will Hunting and shit. Didn't matter. Everyone was agog at the man as he worked the room. He was so good at what he did and stuff. And we just watched him for 10 minutes, like just put everything aside and watched him do his thing. The fun thing about this job is every once in a while, you can see someone who's truly excellent practice their craft front and center, right there. And you could touch them. Sometimes you watch people do things, you're like, must be magic. It's gotta be wires. That can't be real. We could have poked him and he was right there. It's awesome. Chasing Amy.
I haven't liked a man in a long time. And it's not because I'm a man hater or something like that. It's just been some time since I've been exposed to a man that didn't immediately live into a stereotype of some sort. And I want you to feel comfortable with me because I'd really like us to be friends. So if there's anything you want to know, it's okay to ask me.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Why girls?
Chasing Amy used to be the umbrella movie. If I made a movie that people didn't like, I could always turn to Chasing Amy, open the Chasing Amy umbrella and be like, but I did make Chasing Amy, and that would stop the rain. It was very forward-thinking, progressive movie for 1997. We are now in 2024. So 27 years on, the movie has aged differently for different audiences. Like I meet people at Comic-Cons, I meet people in the real world who will sit me down and tell me how Alyssa Jones was their life preserver, their buoy. I saw a woman and a world that I could go to because I lived in a place that was nothing like that and I couldn't be myself. So I know the movie has that type of power. But, you know, for an audience that wasn't around when it happened, I guess some of it is abrasive and hits hard and doesn't feel, you know, a lot of people are baffled that we don't call Alyssa bisexual. We don't just say she's bi, man. Like we're always saying she's gay, she's gay. In 1997, bisexual wasn't really a popularized term. It was a kind of binary equation back then to some degree. It was gay and straight. So it wasn't like I'm disavowing that. In fact, there's a pretty eloquent explanation for bisexuality, which is crazy because it was written by a straight man in that movie that Joey encapsulates while she is explaining to Holden why him.
Maybe you knew early on that your track was from point A to B.
But unlike you, I was not given a fucking map at birth. So I tried it all.
But it does feel weird that that movie is seen by some cats as not progressive, where I'm like, oh my God, like that's all it was, like when we made it and stuff. When we made it, there weren't a lot of voices getting to tell their story. And perhaps there's a, like, why is this straight guy telling this like gay story? And also the most interesting story to be told is Alyssa's story, although I could argue that Hooper's story is fascinating. And the story we tell is the boring ass white guy at the center of it. But I was the boring ass white guy at the center of my own life. And so it made sense that the story is told through Holden's perspective. And, I guess if they're still talking about it 27 years later, something worked about it. The 4:30 movie.
That car blows.
No way, it's like a Batmobile.
Who cares? Batman's a stupid old TV show.
I read in Starlog they said they're gonna make a new Batman movie.
Huh. It'll flop. Nobody's ever gonna pay to see a Batman movie.
Going into this movie, I'd just gone crazy. Like, I went to a mental hospital for a while, and I got everything worked out. If you ever need help, kids, reach out. There's nothing wrong with it. I had stopped smoking weed because I'd been in for a month, and I was like, oh shit, like I haven't smoked weed in a month. Let me keep going. So this was the first movie that I was going to direct where I hadn't smoked weed. And then I was so non-smoky that I fell down this existential rabbit hole. If these kids know anything about me, because they're all like in their early to mid 20s, it would only be from really the last 15 years of their life and really probably the last 10. And all of that time, I've been a stoner. So what if they come to set and they're like, where the fuck is the guy we thought we were going to work with and shit? So I was like, oh shit, Authentic Kev has to make this movie. And Authentic Kev hasn't directed a movie without being stoned since Cop Out. So from Cop Out forward, man, every movie I made as a stoner. And when you're a stoner director, man, there are no problems. You just constantly see the joy of creation. You're just like, what do you mean, man? When that person doesn't show up, we'll get somebody else. Are you kidding me? They're having a good time. We're making movies and this is nuts. Let's do it. When the movie was done, I eventually asked the kids, I was like, were you guys like disappointed that like I wasn't stoned the whole movie? And Nick was like, you weren't? And I was like, no, oh my God. He's going, you were always so quiet. I was like, that's not the kind of stoner I ever was. I was chatty stoner and shit. If I realized, since I wasn't stoned while I was making the movie, I finally realized what I do for a living. I'm like, oh, like I artificially try to recreate wonderful things that have happened to me and moments that I felt were absolutely magical to try to relate that to an audience. And then for the rest of my life, whenever I see the movie or somebody references that point that had once been so personal to me and now is just some element in a movie that I made, I have this kind of warm feeling of like, oh, I remember when that was mine. Like, and now it's everybody's. My favorite thing in the movie, though, is this scene with Genesis Rodriguez and Austin Zager, who plays Brian David, who's kind of like a version of me. And Genesis Rodriguez plays like the hot usher that works at the theater that you eventually find out wants to be a filmmaker. I'm going to get real emotional talking about this. And gives him essentially the idea for like, you can make movies too.
You know who Martha Coolidge is?
Yeah, movies are my life too. Valley Girl is in my top 10.
Scene did not exist in the script until a week before we shot it. What had happened was I got a text that I thought was coming from George R.R. Martin, who had come to our theater and done a show. Like I did an evening with George R.R. Martin at Smodcastle. And the person I thought was George R. Martin was like, I'm going to be near Jersey this summer. And I said, well, this is great. Do you want to be in this movie we're making? Do you want to like be sitting in the theater? Like want to do a cameo? And then the person wrote back like, I would love to, but do you know who this is? And I said, yeah. And then I was like, wait, do I? And I looked and it was George R. R. Martin is in my phone as GRRM. Genesis Rodriguez is in my phone just as GR. So Genesis Rodriguez, who I've worked with before on Tusk and Yoga Hosers, was texting me, like out of the blue and stuff. Didn't know anything about us making a movie. And I've just asked her to be in it. It's like George could sit in the audience as a cameo and it'd be cool. Genesis, like an actress, legit, like it'd be weird to just have her sitting in the audience. Like, she gave like one of the best monologues I've ever shot on film in Tusk. So I was like, yeah, man, come out and play. And she was like, all right, I'll call my agent. And I started thinking of a scene or a character for Genesis to play. I was like, oh, I can write a scene that's kind of like when my sister told me to like be a filmmaker.
I've never met anyone who wanted to be a director before.
Sure you have. Just look in the mirror.
Me? A director? Nah. I just love going to the movies.
Yeah, man. That's how it starts.
Because of that dopey ass mistake, I wrote her that part, and it is the best scene in the movie. It makes me cry every time I see it. She like nails it so well. So you want to talk about happenstance? Like if she hadn't texted, I never would have thought about Genesis, and I never would have written that scene. And that scene defines the movie.
And the truth about you and me is we're filmmakers. We just haven't made our films. Yet.
I like my eyeline to be as close to the lens as possible. You know where I learned that from? Bruce Willis. He also says shit like this: dark, blood, mud. That's how you shoot me. Dark, blood, mud.